That was a very dramatic introduction there with the state, being told you stay behind the curtain until you're told to come out. And Mark's back there and he says, "How can you hear anything from inside this curtain?" I said, "When they clap, just walk out, you'll be fine." Mrs. Bumpers, it's so nice to see you, and distinguished guests, it is good to be with you to introduce my friend, Mark Shriver. I would say that in about 2007, I had the great privilege of meeting Mark as he was here on one of his missionary trips for the Save the Children program, which he will, I'm sure, talk about a bit. I found that he was infectious with his enthusiasm for doing good for people all over this nation through the works of Save the Children, and we talked a lot about how we might increase the role of Save the Children right here in Arkansas, and we've certainly done that. In his book, he talked about, and I'm hoping that he'll talk a little bit tonight, about his memories of growing up with his family and going duck hunting with his father on the eastern shore of Maryland. And so I took it upon myself back in 07 or so to invite him to come to Arkansas to go duck hunting. And he did. And so I have to say that I remember very vividly the first night having him at our, it's not so much a lodge or even a shelter that I would say that we have in Poinsett County at our duck club. It's somewhat reminiscent of a turn-of-the-century Mexican jail. But it's where we spend the night, and I have to say that all of my duck hunting friends and partners were somewhat nervous about having a member of an American royal family in our duck club with us, and they were all truly on their best behavior for the first day or so. And the thing is that Mark is so genuine and so gracious and so disarming that it didn't take very long for him to become just one of the guys like everyone else. And by the second day, my friends were back to their old selves, and I actually caught one of them trying to hack into Mark's cell phone, trying to call his then brother-in-law, Arnold Schwarzenegger, because he really wanted to do his Terminator impression for him. At some point later on, the other guys were trying to negotiate a weekend for themselves and their wives at Hyannisport, and that didn't work out either. But what has happened is two things. One, Mark continues to come and go duck hunting with us, and is just in fact one of the guys. And two, every single person in that duck club is now a donor to Save the Children and other causes that Mark holds dear. One of them is the father of a special needs child who has become close with Mark's brother Anthony and his program Best Buddies, and we now have the first Best Buddies chapter in Arkansas as a result of hunting in Poinsett County. Everyone knows Mark's family's history, and we know about how Camelot has impacted this nation, even for those of us for whom both the slain president and Attorney General of the United States were gone before we were born. His grandfather, Joseph Kennedy, and his impact on this nation, but it is his parents who are so important in his life and in his DNA and who he is. His mother, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, in her lifelong quest to elevate the needs of the developmentally disabled and the quality of their lives, and truly through the Special Olympics has made life better for the entire world. What a legacy that she left. And his father, Mark, always talks about Daddy with the absolute deepest of sincerity and affection and respect. And it's striking the first time you hear a grown man so unabashedly refer to his parents as Mommy and Daddy as if he's still a child and he loves them so much. So this book that he's invested his heart into about his dad as not just being a great man in terms of impacting the world around him through the great things he did as ambassador to France and right hand of President Kennedy, creator of legal aid and more, and the Peace Corps, of course, but it's why he was considered to be a good man. And so it is a great privilege to have in Arkansas the author of the New York Times best-selling book, A Good Man, my friend, Mark Kennedy Shriver.
Thank you, Dustin. That was, you went overboard. You went way overboard, and the stories you told about the duck hunting were all made up, so. But thank you, and it's great to be with Bobby as well and your family. Thank you very much for bringing them. And Skip, I don't know where he ran off to in the back. Thank you for inviting me, and Mrs. Bumpers, thank you very much for coming. Real honor that you're here as well. I was so excited when Skip called up and asked me whether I'd come out to the Clinton School of Public Service and say a few words. That, you know, I come from, as Dustin mentioned, a big family, and we're competitive. So the first thing when you're from a big Irish Catholic competitive family is you call your family and rub it in when you get a big honor. So I called up my brother Bobby. I said, Bobby, can't believe this. Skip Rutherford, he's the dean over there at the Clinton School, asked me to Little Rock. I'm going to go out there. And he goes, Skip Rutherford called me 2 weeks ago and asked me to give that speech. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, you know, I'm the mayor of Santa Monica, California. I've worked with Bono and trying to deal with the issues of Africa and HIV and AIDS and, you know, debt reduction. I'm a big shot, so I hung up on Bobby. So I called up Maria. I said, Maria, you know, I've been asked by Skip Rutherford to go to Little Rock, Arkansas. I got to talk about Dad and some of the stuff that we do at Save the Children. She goes, Skip Rutherford called me a week ago and asked me to give that speech. I said, what do you mean? She goes, you know, I've written 5 bestsellers. You've only written 1. I worked on these conferences on women's issues. I'm, you know, a big cheese out here in California. I can't go. I told Skip I had to do some work, you know, Christopher starting high school, so I hung up on Maria. So I called my brother Anthony that Dustin mentioned, and I said, you know, he hasn't been elected to anything, okay? He hasn't written a book. He lives in Miami, he runs Best Buddies. So I called up Anthony. I said, Anthony, Bobby, you know, I'm asked by Skip Rutherford to go out there at Little Rock. Bobby told me he's been asked. Maria said she's been asked. What do you think? And there's a pause. He goes, I got a message here to call Skip Rutherford. So I guess I'm number 4 or number 5. I never called my brother Timmy, but thank you, Skip. I really appreciate this honor. All right, I made that all up, okay? It is an honor, Skip, to be here with you and with all of these folks to say a couple words about Dad and the importance of public service. I know, just before I say anything, I know how much my father respected Senator Bumpers and the great work that the Bumpers family has done. He was honored by President Clinton with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. President Reagan gave it to my mother about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years earlier. My father never complained that he never got one, but when President Clinton gave it to him, you can see it on video somewhere, he was so proud. He had such great respect for not only President Clinton, but Mrs. Clinton as well, who, as many of you know, did a lot of work in legal services, was on the Corporation for Legal Services Board of Directors with Mickey Cantor, which was the entity that my father had created, the War on Poverty. So he had such amazing respect, and there's a picture for both President and Mrs. Clinton. And there's a picture in our house when our first child was born. She was about 2 years old, and they opened up a new building in Washington on the Peace Corps. And Molly, our daughter, was a little baby, and Mrs. Clinton came to the ribbon cutting and grabbed my daughter, and it was in the Washington Post, and bam, we got Mrs. Clinton on the wall. Big admirers of the Clintons, and very honored to be here. So thank you, Skip, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I thought I'd say just a couple words about the book, and then I hope we're going to do a question and answer, and Skip's going to come back up, and we can talk about Dustin's candidacy, what a great Attorney General you have in this state, the fact that you have the youngest Attorney General in America, the first guy to go and argue as an Arkansas Attorney General a case in front of the Supreme Court in, 16 years? And he got the big W, so we love that. I'm proud of the fact that he was there for Judge Sotomayor when she testified on behalf of her candidacy for the Supreme Court. So you got a real leader in Arkansas and across the country on the legal front. But before I talk too much about Dustin, let me tell you why I wrote this book on my dad. You know, when he was dying and right after he died, a lot of folks came up and said to me, you know, your father was a good man. And I had read these newspaper clippings and seen it on television, the fact that he was called a great man for some of the work that Dustin mentioned, creating the Peace Corps, creating under President Johnson the war against poverty, legal services for the poor, Job Corps, VISTA, which became, you know, which is really the model for AmeriCorps. Upward Bound, foster grandparents, the list goes on, and then working with my mom to spread Special Olympics around the world. And at the same time was happily married to the woman of his dreams for 56 years, raised 5 kids, all of whom love him, went to Mass on a daily basis, and I mean every day. And these people came up to me at the wake, the 2 waitresses from his favorite restaurant, and said, "Your father was a good man." Turned around and walked away. The guy at the U.S. Air counter in Washington at the National Airport said the exact same thing. "Your father was a good man." Spent some best times of his career was walking my father through security when he was struggling with Alzheimer's, and how my father was so good to this guy. And I wanted to dig in to figure out, what that meant. It went from kind of something nice people said to hearing it so many times that it became a refrain that I think demanded out of me that I understood, get a better understanding of what made him a good man. And how he did it all with such joy. And so I dug in and read some of the notes that he wrote me. He wrote almost every day of my life. When I was in high school, he'd slip a note under the door. In college, I'd get a letter or 2 every day, amazingly enough. And after we were married, I'd still get letters. It could be about Baltimore Orioles box score. It could be about a book he had read by Elie Wiesel, or an article in Time, or the yearbook from the Baltimore Orioles, or something in Newsweek, or a book by Bob Woodward. He was just constantly thinking, and the messages could be about a conversation, it could be about something he had read, it could be about how to behave as a human being. And I wanted to dig in to try to figure out what the source of that joy and energy was. So I wrote, as you'll see in the book if you read it, is it focuses on 3 areas that I think, 3 values that drove his life. And it was his faith in God. It was a faith that demanded acts of hope and acts of love. And as corny as that sounds, I think it's really true. He was raised in a very devout Catholic family. He survived the Depression when the family lost all their money, put himself through high school, college, and law school. And I think this faith sustained him through that. He didn't actually go to his law school graduation ceremony because the day after final exams he was in the Navy before Pearl Harbor, fought in the Battle of Guadalcanal and Santa Cruz, and I think that faith sustained him through gruesome battles. And I think it was a faith that, so often today faith is used to divide people, but it was a faith I think that was very, very inclusive. And it was a faith that demanded that he live a life of love and hope. And you see it when he got out of the war and he goes to Chicago. He becomes the head of the Chicago Interracial Council, and he works closely with Martin Luther King to desegregate the Catholic hospitals and Catholic schools. He works as head of the Chicago Board of Public Education, where he's appointed by Mayor Daley to integrate the public schools as well. And then you see acts of great hope, like the creation of the Peace Corps, which was started out of nothing. And President Kennedy had a famous line that he thought it was going to be a disaster, so he gave it to my father because it was going to be easier to fire a relative than it would be to fire a political appointee. The other, act I think of great hope was his role in the 1960 election, and my father ran the Civil Rights Unit because he had these extensive connections across the country with the African American community, but just extensive connections through his work. 2 of his classmates in law school, Dustin, you'll be interested to know, were Supreme Court justices. Wizard White, Potter Stewart, and my dad, and Jerry Ford. It's an amazing, probably the most amazing collection of talent in a law school class ever. But he had arranged, when Dr. King got arrested in late 1960, and the campaign had been told at the beginning of that campaign that if Kennedy said anything positive about Khrushchev, Castro, or King, they were going to throw their support behind Nixon. And Dad, when King got arrested, they came up with the idea of having Senator Kennedy call Mrs. King to express her concern for her husband's safety, because a lot of people thought that Martin Luther King was going to be killed in a Georgia jail, which is amazing, we sit here in 2012. And Dad proposed the idea, got shot down, and he waited then a couple days later in a hotel room in Chicago until the hotel room emptied. Senator Kennedy's there, and his closest aide, Kenny O'Donnell, went to the bathroom. And Dad popped the question directly to Jack. Said, "Do you call Coretta?" "Sure." "How do I do it?" Pulls her number out. dials her up, they talk for less than a minute. Kenny O'Donnell hangs up, Kenny O'Donnell comes out of the bathroom, finds out what happened, and said, "You just cost us the election." Civil rights division in the Kennedy campaign gets closed, and all hell breaks loose. Within 72 hours or so, Daddy King, who was a Republican, Protestant, nervous about Senator Kennedy's Catholicism, and had been a Republican since the days of Lincoln for a lot of African Americans, said he's changing his vote. And he's swinging his, as he said, "I'm bringing my briefcase full of votes and putting them on Senator Kennedy's door." And within days, Ralph David Abernathy, a number of very prominent ministers came out in support of Kennedy, who had previously supported Nixon. And when you look at the vote tallies, most people think that the African American vote won in such high percentage that that gave Kennedy the election. Some have said it was a great political move, shrewd, but I think my father saw it as an act of hope. He knew King, and he thought that having a guy like Kennedy reach out to Coretta Scott King would be a way to pull the country closer together. So you see these acts of hope throughout his life, that the King example, the creation of the Peace Corps, the creation of the War Against Poverty, which some of you may know the story that Dad had just come back from a trip in the Peace Corps. For 2 weeks he'd been traveling, and on a Sunday, he got in on Saturday, LBJ calls him up and says, "I'm going to announce there's a war on poverty, it's $1 billion and you're running it." And he said, "Well, I'm running the Peace Corps." He goes, "Just do them both." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean? I don't know anything about domestic poverty." He goes, "Don't worry about it, I'm announcing it in 20 minutes. He said, "Well, can I talk to Eunice?" He goes, "I don't think you need to do that, I'm announcing it." And he literally announced it, and that was his job. And you can listen to the tapes, they're pretty unbelievable. And then you see, I think the last piece, which, and then I'll stop talking, is this, the love that he had, not just for my mother, but for all of us, and I think for, a lot of people. And the one story that my brother Bobby told at the funeral, so I'm not letting any family secrets out, was when he got busted for pot in 1970. My father was thinking of running for president. The family, Uncle Bobby had just died. So it was on the front page of every paper in the country. And my father wasn't in town, and he flew into Massachusetts, and Bobby had long hair, they cut it all off, he had to go to court. And he said it was a very long walk down to my father's room. And he said, the daddy said to him, "Look, sit down. You have to take accountability for this, but I love you, you're a good kid, it'll all work out." And that was it. And I think, Dustin, you probably, if that happened to you as a parent, when you were thinking of either running for president or vice president or governor, and you think about, wow, how do you react in that type of situation? I mean, I think my head would have exploded, right? It was just really hard. And I think what he was showing was that it was more important for him to take care of his kid than it was for his own career. And I think if you really, as I struggled to figure out how to be a better father, a better husband, have a better relationship with God, you look to that example, and I think you see a very powerful example of how to be a good man. There's so many, men feel like we have to be the alpha male. You got to be in charge of your family, tell your wife what to do, definitely tell your kids what to do, yell at them when they screw up. And my father, I think, thought that was ridiculous. That what was really important was love, and to provide unconditional love and support, to hold your child accountable when they make mistakes, but to support them. And that was really what drove him. It was these acts of hope and love and faith that make a difference, I think, in people's lives and in the connection. So I think that's really the gist of the book. I talk a little bit about his experience with Alzheimer's. That really is obviously a brutal disease, robs you of your memory, robs you of any knowledge of what happened in the past and any concept of the future. But at the same time, with him, the beauty of it left him in the moment, which he had always been in. So if he was talking to Dustin, it was as important. Dustin was a gift from God, and he was as important as the guy who's going to clean up this place afterwards. And very few great people, great men or women, really focus on the guy who's going to come in here and put these chairs away at the end of this event. And if he got to talk to that guy, he would be just as important as Governor Beebe or Dustin McDaniel. That to be in that moment and see that person as a gift from God was really, I think, what made him also terribly unique and so good. What does that have to do, I guess, with the Clinton School of Public Service? I think, my father wasn't successful. He got crushed in politics. It's pretty amazing, 40 some odd years after he ran for vice president, when he wasn't the first pick for George McGovern, when he got crushed when he ran for president in 76. Guy hasn't been on the ballot in 36 years, that, we're talking about him in a place of, public service next to a museum in honor or library in honor of a president who got elected twice and is a great political leader. But I think what resonates is the story of trying, that he tried to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, that he tried to move these ideas forward. Wasn't successful, but he tried. And I think that ultimately when you look at those types of things, that's what's really important. Some guy said to me the other day, "It's going to be a great legacy for your father, this book." And I was like, wow, I never thought of it as a legacy piece, because he never talked about it. Never said anything about his legacy, because he was in the moment and he was trying to work on what was important in the future. And I think that ultimately is his legacy, the effort to try, and that I think is what defines him. I'll tell you one last story and then I'm going to shush. The guy that helped me kind of think through the book and helped edit it told me a couple months after, just before we were finished, that he got engaged to his girlfriend. And I said, "Wow, what happened, Greg? You've been dating for a while." And he said, "Honestly, I think your father's become a really good friend of mine." And he told me I needed to make a commitment to love. I needed to make a commitment to this woman. So, a year after he died, he was still making friends. So I hope this little book, you get to make a new friend with my dad, and then he makes new friends with you. Thank you very much.
All right, we've got time for questions. If you please raise your hand, then we'll get the microphone to you. Any questions from this group besides being stunned by Mark's? Surely to goodness there's a question or two. Yes, Charles, you're back there.
We didn't plant any questions.
No. Bill? We did.
Actually, it's a bit of a softball because we did talk about it at the pregame show, I guess you'd call it. But your work with Save the Children, one of the things we learned here at the Clinton School is how to be leaders, how to develop leaders, what makes a leader. And you talked about how when you were brought in to take over Save the Children, you had a bunch of relationships with nonprofits and whatnot, but you decided to shift away from that and go directly to the schools with your program. So it'd be interesting to hear about your thought process and how you decided on doing that.
So what we're talking about is when I came on SAVE, that SAVE had partnerships with small mom and pop nonprofits, and I just felt like the infrastructure wasn't there to grow the program, and that a lot of folks nowadays look at the cost-benefit analysis of investment of public dollars, and that's what I looked at a lot as a public servant. Are we getting a good ROI, return on investment for public dollars that are invested? And I felt that 20 kids going to an after-school program for the money we were investing in these programs wasn't as beneficial as if we partnered with the school and impacted all the kids in the school, and that all the kids in the school benefited from our in-school, after-school, and summer literacy programs. So we shifted those relationships from these small little nonprofits that weren't accounting for the dollars in some cases as well as they should have, and didn't have the reach to try to reach and impact more kids. And it was, at a degree, I'm hoping that the Save the Children work, which Dustin has been so instrumental in helping us expand here in Arkansas, that is, it's an effort of hope, and we were down today, what county were we in, Amy? St. Francis, I'm sorry, I thought it was Lee. St. Francis County, and working with running a Head Start program there, and the woman who makes the breakfast and lunch at the Head Start Center that we Save the Children now runs, been there for 44 years. And, I don't know, Skip, when I first started looking at this stuff, I didn't realize, I guess I just was oblivious to it all, that, you know, Dad took money, federal dollars, okay, and gave them to, you know, poor people like that woman, okay, African American, bypassed the governor, Favis, I guess at that point in 68, 69, and was trying to get their kids to enter kindergarten ready to learn so that they could go to universities that had been segregated. That's pretty amazing. I mean, talk about the audacity of hope. He was giving dollars to lawyers to represent poor people so that they weren't going to get shortchanged or screwed by, you know, the government or by other interests. And he was hiring lawyers that he knew was going to turn around and sue him, which they did do. I mean, that's crazy. And you're bypassing the political structure. If you know, if you're governor and the federal government's giving money to poor people, in this case, African Americans, so they could put their kids in school, so they could go to segregated universities, and you don't get to control that money? Wow. And that's some real political courage. And he got lambasted for it. I was at an event, and a guy stood up and told me he worked in Arkansas, and told me about Governor Favis calling him up and yelling at him, because he was really upset that the federal government was giving money directly to poor people in Arkansas. And this guy was 24 years old or something, and he, you know, said, "Governor, that's the way it is." And then he went to Washington, and he had never met my father. And he said that he saw my father walk in one day, and somebody said, you know, the next day, Governor Favis is on the phone, picked up the call in the hall, and had the conversation. Yep, thanks, bye. And he didn't waver. Kept the program going in Arkansas, supported this 25-year-old kid in his effort to keep Head Start programs going in Arkansas, and it happened all around the country. So that took real guts, and I hope that, you know, Save the Children in its own little way is continuing those acts of hope by trying to work within the school systems, not only in Arkansas but around the country, to help kids enter kindergarten ready to learn so that they can do whatever they want to do, whether it's a lawyer or a doctor or a car mechanic or whatever their aspirations are. That's what we're trying to do.
Anybody else?
Came all the way to Little Rock and no one's got a question.
We just had to break the ice here. We got
Right. Yes, ma'am.
now we got.
I really appreciate your book and your position about not splintering, getting rid of the hate baiters. And
Yes.
with us being in the middle, not the middle, hopefully it's getting close to the end of this election cycle, it's getting, of course, nastier. How do we elevate the playing field and put the spotlight more on things like Save the Children?
I think, you know, I mean, when I talk about my father's faith, which I don't think I made clear, it was an inclusive faith. I mentioned it, but, you know, there was a speech I came across that I'd never seen, and it's in the book, in which he called upon Father Kelly, Reverend Smith, and Rabbi Weinberg to work together to do our Father's business, capital O, capital F. And this was a public employee in the mid-60s saying that. So he didn't really care whether you were a Republican or a Democrat or Catholic or Jewish or agnostic or atheist or Muslim. It was about what unified us. And, you know, he was really proud that George Romney was the National Honorary Chair of VISTA. He was proud of Mrs. Reagan's support of foster grandparents, Orrin Hatch with Special Olympics and Job Corps. I think there's so much more that unites us than what divides us, but the politicians and other leaders are, you know, trying to figure out how to divide us so they can get to 50+1 vote. And I think the only way to kind of change that, not kind of change it, is that you got to get involved. If you're sick of it, you got to tell people you're sick of it. You know, I talked to some of the students earlier, and, you know, one of the students said, "Well, you know, it's just hard to do, and you know, people complain all the time on Facebook." Well, as a former state rep, if this crowd showed up and said you wanted to invest in early childhood education, I'd take notice of it, particularly if you were from my district, because a couple of votes can swing an election in the state legislature. But if you just sit there, not that you do it, but if people sit there and complain, it's just not going to change. I mean, democracy is really a contact sport. You got to get in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt said, and, you know, get bloodied and beaten and, you know, sweat. But, you know, complain, you're not going to get anything done. And if you're sitting around waiting for LBJ to, you know, dedicate $1 billion like he did in 1965 for a war against poverty, or a, Sergeant Shriver come along, we're gonna lose, because we gotta. If it's most political leaders follow. They don't lead, they follow, and because they don't want to get out ahead, because they don't want to lose their job, because they don't want to lose all the perks of being in an elected office, right? So you got to show them you got to lead them. At least that's what I think. I don't know. Does anybody? Maybe everybody disagrees, but that's what I think.
Bumpers has a question right there. Wait for it. Bob's going to get you the microphone.
I don't know if you were too young to remember, but when he was running for vice president and McGovern, my husband was governor at that time. So they came to Arkansas several times because it was one of the few places in the South that welcomed them, George McGovern and Shriver. So we got to know each other quite well, and your mother came here with Special Olympics while he was governor, stayed with us at the governor's mansion, made me, I'm about as athletic as a cow, who made me go out to the stadium in North Little Rock and do exercises out in public.
Yes. That sounds familiar, yes.
Yes. And he offered, when I started Peace Links, it started here, but then I took it to Washington.
Yes.
He gave me office space in his law firm in the Watergate.
Yes.
To start Peace Links. And until we got enough funding to have an office of our own. So that's just another way of what a good man he was.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just let me say one thing about the Special Olympics. I think a lot of people, not a lot, but folks would think, well, my father was behind a woman, a very strong woman who created Special Olympics. And again, got to contextualize it that to have people running with developmental disabilities running around our backyard in the early 60s, when most people with developmental disabilities were in institutions and not working and not mainstream like they are today, was pretty revolutionary. And there's a picture in the book of my mother when my dad was ambassador to Paris, France, right? France, aristocratic France, used to turn the American embassy into a training facility for people with developmental disabilities, and their tires and people were running through the embassy training for Special Olympics in the American embassy in the 60s. And it's, crazy, amazing, and some people thought, I think, that he was weak because, my mother was out front and doing this stuff. But I think that's what, when you're that's what love demands, If your wife is fired up on something like that and you support her, even though at that point people with developmental disabilities were shunned. They're shunned today, but they were shunned a lot more in the 60s. And, women weren't doing those kinds of things. So she was smoking cigars and bringing people with developmental disabilities and making the governor's wife get down and do jumping jacks. That's pretty wild stuff.
Question? Yes, sir, right here.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right? Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Mr. Shriver, my name is Larry Taylor, and as a schoolboy, I'm the brother of a severely retarded sister. During President Kennedy's administration, he had groundbreaking work for the mentally retarded. I can remember when Special Olympics was developed, my parents thought it was the greatest thing in the world. You also have a bond with our Attorney General that you may not know about. 8 or 9 years ago, the Department of Justice sued the state of Arkansas, the governor, and tried to close the Conway Human Development Center, our largest state-run, congregate care facility for the mentally retarded. Through our Attorney General's good work, the state of Arkansas not only took on the Department of Justice, they beat the Department of Justice and kept that center open for 500 of our state's most vulnerable mentally retarded residents.
Yes.
And I can't thank him enough, or you and your family enough, for what you've done for the DDA world.
Thank you. Thank you. I think if I could, can I just make a comment on that, Skip?
Sure, make a comment, sure.
Just quickly, when I was in the state legislature, a lot of the stuff President Kennedy did, which I think he admits in, tapes and writing, my mother, made it happen. just wham, just constantly on that issue. When I was in the state legislature, the issue had shifted to the needs for people with developmental disability for housing, rental units, and jobs, and their employment rates and their home ownership rates were terrible. And Mother used to call me up all the time, and I'm doing work. Slide in this line in this page, making sure that people with developmental disabilities get some of that money you're working on. She was relentless, and she was relentless with my Uncle Senator Teddy Kennedy on all of this stuff. Just people would like give it to her just to get her the hell out of the room. But it's that type of focus, to your question earlier, that moves political leadership, particularly for those that don't have a voice. And people with developmental disabilities aren't generally billionaires. They don't have a big voting bloc, and unless you have somebody engaged in that issue that's fired up about it and focused and relentless, change doesn't happen.
Okay, we got a question right here.
Thank you though for those comments, really nice.
One more Special Olympics. I'm Terry Greer with Special Olympics Arkansas. I've sat on committees with your mom and with your dad for I've worked for Special Olympics for 24 years. Shelley Yelding as well for 26 years, and Donna Morey, who sits on our board. And
you survived those meetings.
Just amazing, honored to be a part of your family. Know Timothy well, and just wonderful, wonderful people, and just can't tell you how much we appreciate what your family's done for your sister.
Thank you.
Truly, thank you very much.
I didn't mention Timmy in my opening joke, but my brother Timothy runs Special Olympics. He's the chairman of the board there.
I need to invite him.
Sorry?
I need to invite him.
Yeah, you Skip, it doesn't matter now because I'm here.
That's right.
I was first.
That's why I said it's okay now. Yeah. All right, we have a question about it.
I guarantee you I'm better than him anyway. So. That's a joke. You can tell Timmy I said.
I wasn't sure I was going to say anything or not, but then all these things about Special Olympics. But my sister, Carol, I'm also from a large Irish Catholic family, but she worked at Special Olympics in Washington, D.C., and I had the pleasure and the privilege to meet both your mother and father, and yet your mother was sitting in her office smoking a cigar.
Right. She didn't do it all the time, so I don't know what she was doing with you.
She was, and he came in, they were going somewhere, and he came in and he was gracious and handsome, and I had flown in from Ohio, and he wanted to know what I did and about my children and that sort of thing, but I know that my sister respected both of them very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. That guy back there's got a question. I was at did a thing the other day, and some guy at the end of it, just to show you my father's reach on this stuff, which is, guy comes up to me, he was cleaning off the table, right? And he goes, my father used to deliver Western Union telegrams. You remember those? And I said, yes, sir, I do. He goes, my father did it for 30 years. The only guy who ever talked to him was your dad. Loved going to deliver Western Union telegrams. Your father would bring him in and have an iced tea and talk to him about what was going on. And he goes, these other people, you just deliver it, bam, close the door on you. I was like, wow, that is a great story. And it's, very similar to what you just said. So how you do that, we're all, I think, trying to figure that out, regardless of your age or your position. A woman who works for us in Mississippi wrote me a note the other day, African-American woman. Her lead sentence was, I didn't know what I was going to get out of a book about a bunch of rich white people. Which is my favorite line ever. But it's really a story that I think we're all kind of dealing with. How do you deal with your parents, your kids, balance that, your commitment to God? How do you treat, this person the same as you treat a big shot? How do you have a relationship with God and your friends and your community? And that's what he did really well. And that's what the book is really about. It's not about a rich white guy who, was famous to some degree. Yes, sir.
My name is Keith Gasson-Mark, and I want to thank you for your book. My father was also a good man. I lost him a year ago in August after a lengthy illness, similar to what your dad went through. And so the parallels in the book meant a lot to me. And as I was reading it, I thought back to my father's eulogy when I made the comment that when I was a young father, I would always go to a bookstore and pick up, a book about, how to be a good dad or something. And one of the quotes, I can't remember who said it, but it always stood out to me was that always love your children every hour of every day. Mm-hmm. And my father was very much like that. And when I was reading your book, I know that your father was that way, and y'all know that. But on a lighter note, I saw you on the Cabrera Report, and it was great. You held your own very well.
Thank you. You can sit down now.
Yeah. But one of the parts I liked the most is when you were talking about the campaign when your dad was running for vice president and they lost to the Nixon campaign.
Yes.
And then he kind of talked about what happened after that and how good, your dad was and everything. The exchange y'all had I thought was very good about what your father said after the loss, and I thought if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so thank you. The reference he's talking about is after the election that Mrs. McGovern was crying, and my father went over to both of them and said, "George, we may have lost the election, but we didn't lose our souls." And then when as I said to Colbert, because he goes, your father lost everything. And I said, well, this is his line. And I said, a month ago, which is true, I was at George McGovern's 90th birthday in Washington, 500 people in the room, saying what a great guy he was. And I said, if you really look back, I think we know who won that election. The other two guys were out in, 24 months in shame. And the other, both my father and McGovern, World War II vets, brutal combat, really made a commitment to the country. They may have lost the election, but they didn't lose their souls. And I think ultimately that's, what's important. Do you maintain your integrity, and do you do the right thing by people that don't, can't help you out? That's what it's about, I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.